5 signs God marked you from birth. Have you ever felt that your life is marked by something greater than yourself? Have you experienced that strange sensation that your destiny was written long before you took your first breath? The renowned Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung, who passed away in 1961, dedicated decades of his life to studying what he called the individuation of the soul, that mysterious process by which certain people seem destined for a specific purpose from the very moment of their conception. Jung documented fascinating cases in his extensive research of individuals who, from their earliest childhood, showed patterns of behavior and experiences that distinguished them radically from the rest of humanity. These weren't simply personality differences or particular talents, but something much deeper and more transcendent. It was as if these people had been touched by a divine force that had marked them with a special purpose from before their birth. During more than 40 years of clinical practice, Jung observed that those patients who had experienced what he called a life marked by divine synchronicity shared very specific characteristics from their earliest childhood. Their personal stories revealed a consistent pattern that seemed to indicate a higher intervention in their lives. It was as if the universe itself had imprinted an indelible mark on their souls, an invisible signature that distinguished them from the rest of humanity and prepared them for specific missions in the grand tapestry of existence. These findings revolutionized Jung's understanding of human purpose and led him to develop his theory of destiny archetypes, individuals whose lives seemed to follow a script written by a higher intelligence. It wasn't coincidence that these people experienced certain events, encounters, and revelations at specific moments in their lives. Everything was part of a master plan designed to prepare them for the role they would play in the world. Today I want to share with you 5 unmistakable signs that God marked you from birth, based not only on Jung's studies, but also on decades of observing spiritual patterns that repeat again and again in the lives of those who have been chosen for divine purposes. But before continuing, if this topic resonates in the depths of your being, if you feel these words are speaking directly to your soul, I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Here we explore together the deepest mysteries of human existence and the divine purpose that each of us carries within. The first sign, sacred solitude from earliest childhood. The first indicator is perhaps the most unsettling and yet the most revealing of all, the experience of sacred solitude from the earliest childhood. I'm not talking about the common shyness that many children experience, nor the natural introversion that characterizes certain temperaments. I'm referring to that deep, almost cosmic loneliness that made you feel as if you were a visitor from another world, as if your soul had been temporarily deposited on this plane of existence, but belonged to a completely different reality. Were you one of those children who felt strangely alone even when surrounded by people? Did you experience that peculiar sensation of being an observer of life rather than an active participant in it? This wasn't ordinary loneliness born from social rejection or lack of social skills. It was something much deeper and more mysterious, the loneliness of a soul that vaguely remembers its divine origin and feels displaced in a world it doesn't recognize as its true home. This sacred solitude manifested in multiple ways during your childhood. Perhaps you were the child who preferred contemplating the stars instead of playing with other children. Maybe you found yourself creating extraordinarily detailed imaginary worlds, not as escapism, but as a way to reconnect with realities that your soul knew but your conscious mind couldn't completely remember. Or perhaps you simply felt more comfortable in silence than in conversation, more connected with nature than with people, more drawn to the mysteries of existence than to the mundane concerns of childhood. This loneliness wasn't coincidence or pathology. It was the first unmistakable sign that your soul had been set apart for something special, prepared from before your birth for a mission that required a unique perspective on the human condition. God, in His infinite wisdom, allows certain souls to experience this early isolation as part of their intensive spiritual training. It's as if the Creator was saying, This child needs to learn to walk alone with me before being able to walk with the world and guide others toward the light. The chosen of God often experience this loneliness because their souls vibrate at a completely different frequency. While other children easily conform to superficial games and trivial concerns of childhood, you found yourself contemplating the night sky, asking yourself deep questions about life and death, about the meaning of existence, about the nature of love and suffering. You were that child who preferred the company of books to that of peers, who felt more comfortable in reflective silence than in social bustle, who seemed to carry the weight of thoughts too big for their small body. This sacred solitude also manifested in your family relationships in very specific ways. Perhaps you felt that although your parents loved you deeply, they didn't really understand you. It was as if you spoke an emotional and spiritual language that only you understood, as if your soul was connected to an invisible reality that they couldn't perceive or validate. And you were right. Your spirit had been touched by the divine from before your birth, and that mark made you different, special, set apart for a greater purpose that transcends ordinary understandings of life. The second sign, prophetic dreams and mystical visions. The second indicator is the constant presence of prophetic dreams, mystical visions, and extrasensory experiences from a very early age. Do you remember having dreams that seemed more real than waking reality itself? Dreams that left you with a strange and powerful sensation, as if you had traveled to another world, another time, another dimension of existence. Children chosen by God often experience what specialists in transpersonal psychology and students of spirituality call dreams of elevated meaning, or initiatory visions. These aren't ordinary dreams full of disconnected fragments from daily life, but extraordinarily coherent, vivid dream experiences charged with symbolism that seem to carry specific messages, profound teachings, or revelations about your purpose in life. Maybe you repeatedly dreamed of places you had never visited, but that felt strangely and deeply familiar, as if they were fragments of an ancestral memory engraved in your soul. Perhaps you saw in your dreams people dressed in clothing from other historical eras, who spoke to you in languages your conscious mind didn't know, but that, inexplicably, you understood with perfect clarity. Or maybe you experienced dreams in which you flew, not as an escapist childhood fantasy, but as a deep and authentic memory of your soul, as if you remembered a state of existence prior to the physical, a time when your spirit wasn't limited by the laws of gravity and matter. These extraordinary dreams weren't the product of an overactive imagination or external influences like movies or books. They were the direct way the spiritual world communicated with you, systematically preparing you for the crucial role you would play in the divine plan. God was training your spirit while your physical body rested, expanding your consciousness beyond the narrow limits of material reality, teaching you to navigate between different levels of existence and preparing you to be a bridge between the visible and invisible worlds. Many of these dreams contained profound religious or spiritual symbolism, even if you hadn't been previously exposed to those traditions or teachings. You saw ancient temples of impossible architecture, heard celestial chants in unknown tongues, encountered beings of radiant light who transmitted knowledge that your conscious mind couldn't fully process, but that your soul jealously guarded as sacred treasures, destined to be revealed at the appropriate moment of your life. In addition to dreams, many chosen children experience visions during waking states, moments when ordinary reality temporarily fades and they are transported to mysterious experiences that deeply mark their souls. These visions can include perceiving auras around people, the ability to sense invisible presences, or even direct encounters with spiritual beings who offer guidance, protection, or teachings. Dastan, the third sign, supernatural sensitivity to others' suffering. The third indicator, and here I want you to reflect with total honesty about your own experience, is extreme and almost supernatural sensitivity to others' suffering from a very young age. Were you one of those children who cried inconsolably when seeing an injured animal on the street? Were you deeply distressed to the point of physical pain when witnessing any form of injustice, cruelty, or pain, even in situations others considered normal or inevitable. This emotional and spiritual hypersensitivity wasn't a character weakness, as many well-intentioned but ignorant adults made you believe during your childhood. It was, in fact, the distinctive mark of a soul that had been specially designed and calibrated by God to be a direct channel of divine compassion in a world that desperately needs healing. The Creator had extraordinarily amplified your natural capacity for empathy because He had destined you to be a spiritual healer, a comforter of the afflicted, a bearer of His unconditional love toward those who suffer in silence. The chosen of God are born with what we could call a cosmically expanded heart. This means your capacity to feel and absorb others' pain is extraordinarily developed, far above normal levels of human empathy. When other children could easily overlook the suffering around them, focusing on their own needs and desires, you absorbed it like a giant emotional sponge. It physically hurt in your chest to see someone being mistreated, humiliated, or ignored. It was absolutely impossible for you to ignore the crying of another human being, animal, or even the silent suffering of plants and nature. This extraordinary sensitivity also extended to unexpressed emotions and hidden pains of people around you. You possessed a kind of supernatural emotional radar that picked up the most subtle frequencies of human pain. You were able to intuitively perceive when someone was deeply sad, even when they smiled and acted as if everything was fine. You could feel the anxiety, fear, hopelessness of your parents, teachers, or family members, even though they desperately tried to hide them from you to protect your innocence. This ability often made you the involuntary confidant of adults who felt inexplicably drawn to share their deepest problems with you, as if your small presence radiated a healing energy that invited them to open up and release their emotional burdens. It was common for adults to comment on how mature you were for your age, how wise you seemed, the peace they felt in your presence, without really understanding they were experiencing the effect of your natural spiritual gift. If you deeply identify with this experience, if you vividly remember being that child who carried the emotional weight of the world on their small shoulders, who cried for others' pain as if it were their own, who felt responsible for healing the wounds of everyone around them, leave me a comment telling me how you lived and processed that extraordinary sensitivity during your childhood. Your personal story might be exactly the healing balm another sensitive soul needs to hear today to understand they're not alone in their experience. The fourth sign, magnetic attraction to the sacred. The fourth indicator is the magnetic and inexplicable attraction to everything sacred, mystical, and transcendent from a very early age, even without direct external influence. While other children were naturally fascinated with toys, video games, sports, or typical entertainment for their age, you felt irresistibly drawn to everything that had an air of spiritual mystery, sacred depth, connection with the divine. This attraction manifested in surprisingly varied and sophisticated ways. Perhaps you found yourself drawing or creating complex geometric symbols you had never seen before in books or television, but that somehow you knew intuitively, and that provided you with a deep sense of peace and spiritual connection. Or maybe you felt deeply moved and transformed when entering places of worship, churches, temples, or sacred sites, regardless of the specific religion your family or community professed. There was something in the atmosphere charged with prayer, devotion, and spiritual seeking that resonated perfectly with the deepest frequency of your soul. This attraction to the divine was also expressed through an early and sophisticated fascination with sacred music, spiritual chants, melodies that seemed to connect directly with higher dimensions of existence. Even if you had never been formally exposed to these musical traditions, your soul immediately recognized them as music from home, sounds that transported you to a state of spiritual ecstasy that your childish mind couldn't explain, but your heart understood perfectly. Other chosen children develop an obsessive fascination with stars, the cosmos, the immensity of the universe, feeling a deep, mystical connection with the infinity of space that goes far beyond simple scientific interest. They spent hours contemplating the night sky, not just admiring its beauty, but experiencing a kind of cosmic nostalgia, as if the stars were old friends calling them back home. Some feel irresistibly drawn to spiritual, philosophical, or mystical texts that are far above their apparent level of intellectual comprehension, but that their soul seems to understand and absorb intuitively. It was common for these children to be found reading encyclopedias about world religions, biographies of saints and mystics, or even sacred texts like the Bible, Quran, or Buddhist scriptures, not out of religious obligation, but from a genuine thirst for spiritual knowledge that seemed to be born from the depths of their being. This constant search for the transcendent was also reflected in the type of questions you asked from a very young age. While other children asked about concrete and tangible things in the physical world, you formulated questions that puzzled and sometimes deeply disturbed adults. Where do we really come from before being born? What happens after death, and why don't we remember it? Why does evil exist in the world if God is good? Does God ever feel lonely? Do plants and animals have souls like us? Why do some people suffer more than others? These weren't casual questions from a simply curious child. They were the deep and eternal concerns of a soul that had been touched by eternity and tirelessly sought answers that went beyond the superficial explanations of the adult world. Jung meticulously observed in his extensive studies that individuals destined to play significant spiritual roles in society often manifest this insatiable search for the sacred from the earliest stages of their lives. It's as if their souls carried engraved a celestial memory of their divine origin and constantly sought to consciously reconnect with that primordial source of love, wisdom, and purpose. We now reach the midpoint of our journey through these divine indicators, and I want to make a significant pause to remind you that this channel exists specifically to accompany you in your gradual but inevitable process of spiritual awakening. If you feel these words are stirring something very deep within you, if you experience chills of recognition while listening to these descriptions, if your soul is whispering, "Yes, this is me," then I earnestly invite you to subscribe and activate notifications so you don't miss any content that can continue helping you on your sacred path of self-discovery and realization of your divine purpose. Sayesti Dur to the fifth sign, transformative trauma and spiritual forging. The fifth and final indicator is perhaps the most profound, complex, and difficult to understand from a limited human perspective. The experience of significant traumas, extreme difficulties, or deep crises that forged you spiritually from a very early age. I know this is an extraordinarily delicate and potentially painful topic, but it's absolutely crucial that we understand it from an elevated and transformative spiritual perspective. The chosen of God often experience what some mystics and spiritual scholars call the cosmic fire baptism from a very young age. This doesn't mean at all that God directly causes suffering or enjoys seeing his children go through pain. Rather, it means that the Creator, in his infinite wisdom that transcends our limited human understanding, allows certain intense trials to touch the lives of those destined to become powerful instruments of healing, transformation, and spiritual elevation in the world. Did you experience devastating losses during your childhood that forced you to face the reality of death and impermanence much earlier than other children? Did you face serious illnesses, traumatic accidents, or situations of abuse that forced you to develop extraordinary spiritual resistance? Did you live through emotional abandonment, family rejection, or circumstances that obliged you to mature spiritually decades before what would be normal or expected? These extremely painful experiences, however devastating they may have been at the time, and however deep the scars they left in your heart, fulfilled a specific and necessary divine purpose in the accelerated development of your soul. They weren't cosmic accidents, divine punishments, or simply bad luck. They were an integral part of your intensive spiritual training, designed to prepare you for the magnitude of the mission ahead of you. Early suffering acts as an extraordinarily powerful spiritual catalyst. It prematurely breaks the protective barriers of the childish ego and opens deep channels of compassion, wisdom, and spiritual resistance that would normally take multiple decades to develop through ordinary life experiences. Children who go through these intense trials emerge with an emotional depth, spiritual maturity, and capacity for empathy that radically distinguishes them from their age peers. This process of spiritual forging through pain doesn't represent divine cruelty, but meticulous and loving divine preparation. God knew from before your birth that the world would need precisely your particular type of strength, your specific form of compassion, your unique way of understanding and transforming human suffering. And to develop these extraordinary qualities in your soul, it was necessary for your spirit to be carefully tempered in the purifying fire of intense and transformative experience. Many of the great spiritual leaders, healers, teachers, and guides in human history shared this fundamental characteristic. Childhoods marked by monumental challenges that systematically prepared them to become bright beacons of hope, wisdom, and healing for millions of other human beings who would go through similar situations. Their personal pain wasn't wasted or in vain. It was alchemically transformed into universal wisdom. Their individual suffering became collective compassion. Their private tears were transformed into public fountains of healing for humanity. Asmara, your divine calling awaits. If you have clearly recognized these 5 indicators in your own life story, if you have felt that deep connection and that visceral recognition while listening to these detailed descriptions, if your soul has been internally nodding and telling you, yes, this perfectly describes my experience, then you already know the sacred truth that your spirit has been patiently whispering for years. You were marked, chosen, and prepared by God from before your birth for a specific, transcendent, and absolutely necessary purpose in the great divine plan. But recognizing and accepting these divine signs is only the first step in your journey toward the complete realization of your destiny. The true spiritual work, the true adventure of your soul begins precisely when you decide to consciously and unreservedly embrace your divine calling, when you definitively stop running from your sacred destiny and begin walking toward it with courage, determination, and unshakable faith. Your childhood marked by sacred solitude wasn't cruel isolation, but intensive preparation for the deep intimacy with the divine that you'll need to fulfill your mission. Your prophetic dreams and mystical visions systematically expanded your consciousness beyond the narrow limits of the physical, training you to operate simultaneously in multiple dimensions of reality. Your extreme sensitivity to others' pain turned you into a refined and powerful channel of divine compassion. Your magnetic attraction to the sacred awakened and kept alive the flame of your direct connection with the infinite mystery of existence. And your early pain forged you as an invincible spiritual warrior, capable of sustaining the brightest light in the midst of the deepest darkness. Every apparently negative, traumatic, or painful experience of your past now takes on a completely new and transformative meaning. You weren't a passive victim of blind chance or cosmic chaos. You were specifically chosen and meticulously prepared for the unique role that only you can play in the grand sacred theater of human existence. Today's world, more than at any other moment in history, desperately needs souls like yours. It urgently needs your refined sensitivity to heal the deep wounds of a fragmented humanity. It needs your authentic connection with the sacred to remember that there exists something infinitely greater and more important than our temporary material concerns. It needs your spiritual strength, patiently forged in the fire of transformative pain, to sustain collective hope when everything seems lost and the world seems to sink into darkness. Your divine calling isn't an optional suggestion you can accept or reject according to your personal convenience. It's a cosmic imperative, a sacred responsibility, an inevitable destiny you've been postponing for too long. You can't continue indefinitely ignoring the clear signs the universe has been persistently sending you throughout your entire life. You can't continue minimizing or underestimating the extraordinary magnitude of your divine purpose. The time of unconscious preparation has completely ended. The crucial moment of conscious and decisive action has finally arrived. Your time has come to shine with the light you've always carried within, to express the unique gifts you've been secretly cultivating, to fulfill the sacred promise you made before incarnating in this world. Always remember that accepting your divine calling doesn't mean the path ahead will be easy or free of obstacles. It means you'll have exactly the strength, wisdom, and spiritual resources necessary to traverse it successfully. It means every step you take will be backed by a cosmic force that completely transcends your limited human understanding. It means your life will have a meaning, purpose, and impact that go far beyond the personal pursuit of comfort, security, and immediate gratification. If these words have touched something very deep within you, if you've recognized your own life story in these 5 sacred indicators, then you can no longer pretend to be an ordinary person with an ordinary life. You can no longer settle for a mediocre, superficial, or purposeless existence. You have been called to the highest spiritual greatness, and that divine calling demands a definitive, courageous, and transformative response. Before closing this sacred message, I want to earnestly ask you not to keep this powerful revelation just to yourself. Share this content with those people in your life who you believe might also be gradually awakening to their own divine purpose. Like this if these words have resonated deeply in your soul and have activated something important within you. Subscribe if you want to continue this extraordinary journey of spiritual self-discovery with me, and leave me a detailed comment telling me which of these 5 indicators has impacted you most deeply and why. Your chosen soul can no longer remain asleep for even one more day. The entire world is waiting for you urgently. God is waiting for you with infinite love. And most important of all, the highest, most powerful, and most luminous version of yourself is waiting patiently to finally emerge and express itself completely. It's time to definitively awaken. It's time to rise with courage. It's time to consciously walk toward the glorious destiny that was written specifically for you before the stars were placed in the firmament and before time itself began to exist.